One of the things we cover in the book is a topic which has been discussed a great deal recently, and it's generational differences in workers. The idea is that we have different generations, the baby boomers, the vets, Generation X, Generation Y, the millennials, whatever you want to call them, and that these people, of course, were born at various times and that they need to be managed differently. That you manage a millennial quite differently than you manage a baby boomer. And there are quite a few books and quite a few recommendations on doing just that. Unfortunately, many of these books and recommendations aren't substantiated by evidence. And we have looked through the evidence quite clearly on this particular issue. And the good news or the bad news, depending on your position, is that generation effects are not very great, if at all. In other words, we are told by some people that millennials have to be treated quite differently. They're a very different beast, a different animal, a different group to Generation X or to the baby boomers, and therefore they have to be managed differently, and we have to treat people very differently given their generation. This is simply not true. The evidence is not in favor of this. There have been some rather good studies recently which have looked at this issue. And the reason why I think people have got it wrong is the assumption is that the differences between individuals are more a function of their age or generation than other factors. Now, we all know with people we like, with people we don't like, with people we work, and that there's enormous differences between workers of any age group. So you put 10, 20-year-olds together and you'll see huge differences in their work motivation, in their enthusiasm, and their abilities and their personality. And the same is true of a group of 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds. And what we know is this, that the differences between individuals based on their ability and their motivation and their personality is much greater than the difference between the generations. In other words, to understand an individual, to manage an individual, it's much more useful to know what they're like as a person, what motivates them, what enthuses them, where their abilities lie, than the fact that they are a millennial or a Generation Y, or whichever group you want to discuss. You see, the assumptions are very odd. The idea is that in 1959, if you were born then, you're a vet, or 1960, you're a baby boomer, that somehow 1 year difference makes a big difference. This clearly isn't the case at all. It's very difficult to differentiate age factors with generation factors. Now, of course, people will say young people are much more savvy, they're much more media literate, they're much less prejudiced than other people, and that might well be true. There are also negative stereotypes of young people, that they are less trusting and that they're less reliable. Well, there are less trusting and less reliable young people, but there are also more trusting and more reliable young people than in the past. So the conclusion we've come to on the basis of what we've read and the evidence suggests that it's not a good idea to treat people as a group of millennials or whatever, a generation difference. Rather, to understand them, to manage them better, to motivate them better, is to understand them as individuals, is to understand their abilities, their personalities, their passions, rather than the fact that they belong to a particular group. I think it's been misleading to suggest that we have to manage groups differently because of their generation. We have to be very sensitive to individual differences, but pay much less attention to the generation from which they come.